Imagine a day that starts like any other. You wake up, perhaps have breakfast with your family, organize your appointments, and follow your routine. Everything seems normal. Life is in the right place. But in the blink of an eye, everything changes. Your house collapses, your loved ones are gone, and suddenly you find yourself in the middle of a deep emptiness, asking, "Why did this happen to me?" This is not just a distant possibility. This is the story of Job, a man who lost everything he had in a single day. Job was admired for his kindness, known for his great faith, and respected by his community. He had everything that many would consider a perfect life: a close-knit family, unparalleled wealth, and a solid spiritual life. But suddenly, this stability turned into chaos. His wealth was destroyed, his health deteriorated, and his family was tragically decimated. Job was thrown into a whirlwind of suffering that would test anyone. Now, allow me a question. What makes someone continue to trust in God when everything around them falls apart? Job is the answer to that question. He faced what seemed unbearable and discovered something that changed not only his life, but also the way we view faith and suffering to this day. But what makes Job so special? In addition to her resilience, there is something fascinating about her story. It begins in an unexpected setting: the sky. While Job lived peacefully on earth, a dialogue took place between God and Satan. Picture this. Satan challenges God by suggesting that Job's faith was superficial, sustained only by his material blessings. God, knowing Job's integrity, allowed him to be tested. This heavenly debate was not about Job himself, but about the meaning of true faith. Can a person continue to trust God when they lose everything? Job proved yes. Job's secret, however, is not just in his resistance. He discovered something that can transform the way we face our own struggles. Job teaches us that there is more to life than what we possess or what happens around us. He shows us that even in the darkest moments, there is a greater purpose. If this message is touching your heart and you believe that more people should hear stories like Job's, take the opportunity now to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Did you know that most people who watch our videos are not yet subscribed? This simple gesture makes all the difference so that we can continue to bring you in-depth and relevant content. Click the sign up button and come be part of this community. Today, more than ever, this story has something to teach us. In a world where we are bombarded by loss, uncertainty, and constant challenges, Job invites us to see beyond suffering. Her journey teaches us about resilience, faith, and the power of trusting in something greater than ourselves. Did you know that studies show that emotional resilience is one of the most important skills for overcoming difficulties? People who develop this ability are able to face losses, bounce back, and find purpose, even in the midst of chaos. Job was a perfect example of this ability long before we had a name for it. He not only faced his pain, but used it as a bridge to an even deeper relationship with God. If you've ever felt lost or hopeless, know that Job felt that way too. He lost everything he had, cried, questioned, and even cursed the day of his birth. But he didn't give up. Job shows us that suffering, however intense it may be, does not need to be the end point of our stories. It could be the beginning of something transformative. Have you ever wondered what keeps a person steady when the ground seems to disappear beneath their feet? For Job, that answer was in two words: faith and perseverance. He faced trials so intense that many people could not bear it, but he maintained his trust in God even when everything around him fell apart. Job's story begins in a scenario of abundance. He was known for his integrity, fear of God, and dedication to his family. His possessions were many: thousands of sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys. He was respected by all, admired for his kindness, and known for his spiritual wealth. However, Job did not allow his possessions to define his faith. On the contrary, he constantly sought God, offering prayers and sacrifices, not only for himself, but for his family. But then, in a single day, everything changed. The narrative transports us to a heavenly setting where God and Satan argue about human fidelity. Satan accuses Job, saying that his faith was a result of his comfortable life and material blessings. God, knowing Job's heart, allows him to be tested, but on one condition: his life would be spared. Here comes the most interesting point. Job, who had everything, suddenly lost everything. Their animals were stolen, their servants were killed, their children died in a tragic accident. And as if that wasn't enough, his health took a hit, leaving him covered in painful wounds. Imagine what it's like to face this string of losses, with no time to process or recover from one before the next one happens. For many, it would be the end of the line. But not for Job. Even in his pain, Job refuses to blame God. He sits on the ground, in ashes, and makes a statement that resonates to this day. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. These words are not only a reflection of his faith, but also his understanding that everything we possess is temporary and that God remains sovereign even in the midst of storms. Job's perseverance does not mean he did not suffer. He cried, lamented, and questioned. He even cursed the day he was born, a reflection of his deep emotional pain. But even so, he did not abandon his trust in God. This teaches us something crucial. Persevering in faith does not mean ignoring suffering, but finding the strength to continue trusting, even when the answers are not clear. Throughout the narrative, Job's friends appear to console him. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar were men of wisdom and experience, but their words failed to offer real comfort. They suggested that Job was suffering because of hidden sins, reinforcing a common belief at the time that all suffering was a direct consequence of sin. However, Job knew that this explanation was simplistic. He recognized his innocence and continued to seek answers directly from God. This constant search for answers teaches us another valuable lesson. Job was not afraid to express his doubts and questions. We often think that faith means accepting everything without questions, but the story of Job shows us otherwise. He not only faced his pain, but also took it to God, seeking understanding and comfort. What makes Job's perseverance so impressive is that he had no guarantee that his situation would be reversed. He did not know that his story would end with restoration. He persevered not because of a promise of reward, but because he believed in the goodness and justice of God, even when everything seemed to contradict that. An interesting point is that, even in his suffering, Job maintained an eternal perspective. He knew there was something bigger than his pain. This reminds us that, in difficult times, it is essential to keep our eyes on what is eternal, rather than getting lost in immediate circumstances. Job is not just an example of spiritual perseverance. He is also a portrait of emotional resilience. Modern studies show that people who maintain a positive outlook about the future have a greater chance of overcoming adversity. Job exemplified this before we even had studies on resilience. He didn't ignore his pain, but he chose to believe that God had a greater purpose, even when he couldn't see it. The climax of this part of Job's story comes when he finally hears the voice of God. Instead of clear answers or justifications, God presents Job with the immensity of his creation. It shows that the world is vast and complex, and that there are things that are beyond human understanding. This was not a rebuke, but a reminder of divine sovereignty and the limitation of human perspective. From this encounter, Job finds new strength. He realizes that his faith does not need to be based on answers, but on a deep trust in who God is. This is the essence of perseverance, not depending on circumstances, but on an intimate relationship with the Creator. For us, this lesson is clear. No matter what challenges we face, the story of Job reminds us that true faith is faith that sustains itself, even when everything around us falls apart. Job teaches us that we can lament and question, but we must never give up trusting. Have you ever wondered why some situations seem unfair or incomprehensible? Why do good people struggle while those who act badly seem to prosper? These are universal questions that span time, and the story of Job delves deeply into these questions. At the heart of his narrative, we find a confrontation between the wisdom of God and the limitations of the human mind. When Job faced his losses and pain, he, like everyone else, looked for answers. He wanted to understand why such terrible things were happening to him, a righteous and faithful man, and who has never asked similar questions in the midst of suffering. Job raised his doubts honestly, trying to make sense of the chaos. Job's search for answers began with advice from his friends. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar tried to explain their circumstances using simplistic logic. Job must have sinned in some way, and therefore was being punished. This view reflected the common mentality of the time, in which suffering was seen as a direct consequence of wrong actions. However, Job knew that this explanation did not make sense in his case. He was conscious of his integrity and refused to accept such accusations. The insistence of Job's friends on connecting suffering and human guilt highlights a recurring limitation of human understanding: the tendency to reduce complex problems to easy explanations. This still happens today. How often do we look for quick answers to difficult situations, trying to find someone or something to blame? The story of Job shows us that this approach does not always reflect reality. The most remarkable point in Job's journey comes when he finally receives an answer, not from his friends, but from God himself. However, the divine response is unexpected. Instead of offering direct explanations for Job's suffering, God asks a series of questions. He challenges Job to consider the immensity of the universe and his own limitations in understanding it. God asks, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Who determined its dimensions or stretched the measuring line over it?" Job 38. He invites Job to reflect on the creation of the world, on the mysteries of nature, and on the workings of forces that are far beyond human understanding. With this, God is not rebuking Job, but offering a greater perspective. There are things that human beings simply cannot understand because our vision is limited while God's is infinite. This interaction between Job and God teaches us a profound lesson about divine wisdom. We often want specific answers to our questions. We want to know why something happened, how it will be resolved, and what the plan is behind it all. However, God's wisdom goes beyond direct explanations. He calls us to trust Him, even when we can't see the whole picture. This idea can be difficult to accept, especially in times of pain. However, it is liberating. Knowing that God is bigger than our problems allows us to rest in His sovereignty. We don't need to carry the burden of understanding everything. We can trust that He is in control, even when everything seems out of order. God's interaction with Job also reminds us that humility is fundamental to our relationship with Him. When Job was confronted with the vastness of creation and the majesty of God, he responded with repentance and reverence. He said, "Before I knew you only by hearing you speak, but now my eyes see you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." Job 42. This moment marks a transformation in Job. He recognizes that, although he does not have all the answers, he can fully trust divine wisdom. This contrast between God's wisdom and human understanding is not just an ancient theme, it remains relevant today. We live in a world where knowledge is more accessible than ever. We can search for answers to practically anything with a simple click. Yet there are still questions that remain beyond our reach, questions about purpose, suffering, and the meaning of life. The story of Job reminds us that it is not human knowledge that sustains us in these moments, but trust in something greater. Science, for example, can explain many things about how the universe works, but it cannot answer the deepest questions of the soul. Why do we lose people we love? Why do we face moments of great difficulty? These questions require something beyond logic. They require faith. Job shows us that, even without understanding everything, we can find peace by recognizing God's sovereignty. Another powerful aspect of this narrative is how it redefines the relationship between humans and God. Job was not condemned for his questions. Instead, he was honored by seeking answers directly from the Creator. This teaches us that God does not reject our questions. On the contrary, he invites us to bring them to him. However, he also reminds us that often our questions can be answered not with words, but with a deeper experience of his presence. Divine wisdom is an assurance that there is a greater purpose in everything we face, even when we cannot see it. Job did not receive a detailed explanation of why he suffered, but he did receive something even more valuable, a direct encounter with God, which transformed his perspective. This teaches us that true wisdom is not having all the answers, but trusting the one who has them. Whatever challenge you face today, remember this lesson from Job. Even when everything seems uncertain, God remains in control. His wisdom is infinite, and his kindness is constant. We may not understand everything, but we can trust that he is working on our behalf. When all seems lost, it's hard to imagine that anything good can emerge from the ashes. Job experienced this reality. After facing a whirlwind of loss and pain, he hit rock bottom. However, his story does not end in suffering. It becomes a testimony of renewal and hope. This is where we find one of the most inspiring aspects of the narrative: restoration and redemption. After long periods of affliction, Job is confronted by God himself. But instead of offering detailed explanations as to why he is experiencing his trials, God leads him into a transformative experience. This interaction was not just a dialogue, but an opportunity for Job to see the Creator in a whole new way. He realized that even though his life was in pieces, God was still in control and working through his mysterious plans. Something extraordinary happens after this meeting. God turns the focus of the story to Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, who had previously accused him unjustly. God rebukes them for not speaking truthfully and instructs them to make sacrifices. Interestingly, Job, the man who suffered so much, is the one who intercedes for them. This act of prayer demonstrates the greatness of Job's character, who chose to forgive and intercede for those who had failed to support him. After this moment of intercession, the great turning point in Job's story occurs. God restores him in an abundant way, returning not only what he had lost, but doubling his blessings. The biblical text describes that Job received double everything he had before: his cattle, his riches, and his influence. However, what was most significant was not just what he recovered, but the internal transformation he experienced. Job's restoration also involved his family life. God gave him sons and daughters again. He was blessed with 7 sons and 3 daughters, and these, in particular, were described as women of extraordinary beauty. Something unusual for the time is mentioned. Job gave inheritance to his daughters as well as his sons. This decision reflects the spirit of generosity and equality that Job acquired after his experiences. More than material goods, Job received a new perspective on life. He lived for many years after his restoration, seeing up to the 4th generation of his descendants. This longevity is not just an indication of physical blessings, but symbolizes a life full of meaning and satisfaction. Job died old and full of days, an expression that reflects a complete and blessed life cycle. This part of Job's story carries valuable lessons about redemption. First, it teaches us that divine restoration does not always follow what we expect. Often it comes in unexpected ways, touching not only our material resources, but most importantly, our spirit and our heart. Job was not only rewarded, he was transformed. His understanding of God and life reached a depth he had not known before. Furthermore, the story of Job reminds us that redemption does not eliminate the marks of suffering. Job lost his first children, and these losses were not replaced by the children who were born later. This shows us that divine redemption does not erase the past, but allows us to move forward with new hopes and possibilities. God did not minimize Job's pain, but he showed that there was something greater than the pain. A crucial point is that Job's redemption was not achieved through merit or self-effort. She was an act of God's grace. It reminds us that restoration in our lives is not something we can buy or deserve. It is a gift given by a God who sees beyond our limitations and works on our behalf, even when we don't understand how. Job's story challenges us to reevaluate what we consider restoration. In a world so focused on the material and the immediate, we tend to see redemption as a simple replacement of what was lost. However, Job's experience points to something much deeper. True redemption lies in the transformation of our interior, the growth of our faith, and the renewal of our perspective on God and life. This restoration also involves reconciliation. Job not only had his life restored, but also his relationships. He interceded for his friends, forgave their shortcomings, and helped restore their relationship with God. This act of forgiveness is a powerful demonstration of how divine redemption encompasses not only our being, but also our connections with others. The story of Job reminds us that even after the greatest losses, life can be full of hope again. His example encourages us to believe that pain does not define our destiny and that God can use even the darkest moments to create something new and beautiful. Whatever challenge you face today, remember Job. His story is a testimony that pain is not the final chapter of our lives. There is restoration, there is redemption, and there is a greater purpose, even when we can't see it right away. Have you ever stopped to reflect on how much we understand of everything that happens around us? No matter how much we accumulate knowledge and develop technology, there are things that remain beyond our understanding. Job's story challenges us to recognize this reality and approach God with humility and reverence. When Job faced his losses, he asked questions that anyone would ask. He wanted to understand the reason for his suffering. He wanted clear answers. After all, Job had lived a righteous life, dedicated to God. Why then was he facing such calamity? He sought explanations, and his friends with good intentions tried to help him. However, his words were full of judgments and limited interpretations. If you've made it this far, it means this message is making sense to you. So, how about giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel? This way, you help us bring reflections like this to even more people. Be part of this mission by clicking the sign up button right now. The twist in the story comes when God finally responds to Job. But instead of providing a logical explanation for his suffering, God presents a much bigger picture. He invites Job to reflect on the vastness of the universe, the complexity of creation, and the infinite wisdom that sustains it all. God asks, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" Job 38. He talks about the limits of the sea, the stars in the sky, the cycles of nature. The message is clear. There is a divine order that goes beyond what we can understand. This moment is crucial because it confronts Job with something essential: his humanity. He realizes that although he has lived with integrity, his vision is limited. He cannot understand God's infinite plans. And this realization leads him to a point of deep humility. Humility in this context does not mean diminishing yourself or seeing yourself as insignificant. It is recognizing the place we occupy before God and accepting that there are mysteries that are beyond our logic. Job responded to the Lord by saying, "I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me." Job 42. His words show that he not only accepted his limitation, but found peace by trusting in God's wisdom. This kind of humility is difficult, especially in a time like ours, where we are encouraged to seek control and answers for everything. We are trained to believe that with enough effort, we can solve any problem. However, Job's story reminds us that there are situations in which true wisdom lies in surrendering control to God, trusting in His purpose, even without fully understanding it. In addition to humility, the story of Job highlights reverence. Reverence is not just an expression of respect, but a posture of heart that recognizes the greatness of God. When Job was confronted with the majesty of God, he not only fell silent, but prostrated himself in worship. This is the type of reverence that goes beyond words and manifests itself in actions and attitudes. Worshipping in the midst of suffering is one of the most challenging lessons in the story of Job. He did not ignore his pain, but he chose not to allow it to erase his trust in God. Instead, Job used his losses as an opportunity to draw even closer to his Creator. This is one of the deepest marks of someone who lives reverently. recognizing God's sovereignty in all circumstances. An important aspect of this narrative is that Job's humility and reverence were not born from an imposition, but from a genuine encounter with God. He was not forced to humble himself, but he reached this point by realizing the immensity of the Creator. This transformation shows that true reverence is not the result of fear, but of love and understanding. Today we can learn a lot from this lesson. Living with humility and reverence does not mean denying our questions or doubts, but presenting them to God with a heart willing to trust. It means admitting that we don't know everything, and that that's okay. It's a way of resting in the certainty that, even when we don't see the path, God is already on it. We also need to remember that humility does not diminish us, it makes us great. When we recognize our dependence on God, we make room for Him to work in our lives. Job was restored and blessed, but that restoration began the moment he surrendered to the greatness of God. Reverence, in turn, helps us maintain a correct perspective. When we focus on God's sovereignty, we are able to face challenges with more courage and hope. This does not mean that problems disappear, but that our attitude towards them changes. Like Job, we can find strength in remembering that we are in the hands of a God who is infinitely wise and loving. The story of Job invites us to adopt an attitude of gratitude and adoration, even in adversity. When we recognize who God is, our confidence grows. And like Job, we can say with conviction, "Now my eyes see you." Job 42. This renewed vision of God transforms everything, our pains, our doubts, and even our future. So may the story of Job inspire us to live with humility and reverence. May we recognize our humanity, trust in divine wisdom, and worship no matter what we face. For when we do this, we find peace, purpose, and the presence of a God who never abandons us. When we face difficult times, it is common for us to seek support from those around us. Friends and family often play crucial roles, offering comfort and guidance. But what happens when those we trust disappoint us? Job's story gives us a unique perspective on how to deal with these challenges, showing the transformative power of forgiveness and the importance of human relationships in the spiritual journey. During his period of suffering, Job received visits from 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Initially, they acted admirably. When they saw Job in his pain, they sat by his side in silence for 7 days and 7 nights. This gesture of silent presence is a powerful example of how being there for someone in a moment of pain can be more valuable than words. However, as the days passed, these same friends began to fail in their mission to console. Driven by a simplistic view of divine justice, Job's friends began to accuse him of being responsible for his own suffering. For them, suffering could only be the result of hidden sins. His words, instead of bringing comfort, brought judgment and more pain. Job, who was already struggling with his own doubts and anguish, now also had to deal with the disappointment of those who were supposed to support him. This aspect of Job's story reflects a universal truth. The people around us will not always fully understand what we are going through. Sometimes those who want to help us can unintentionally make our pain worse. However, what sets Job apart is his ability to deal with these human failings gracefully. At the end of the narrative, after Job's encounter with God, something surprising happens. God rebukes Job's friends for their inappropriate words and commands them to offer sacrifices as a sign of repentance. But the most striking detail is that God asks Job to pray for them. Think about this for a moment. Job, who has been criticized and accused unjustly, is called to intercede for those who have hurt him. This act of intercession reveals Job's forgiving heart. He could have harbored resentment or demanded a direct apology before praying for his friends. However, he chose to obey God and forgive them, demonstrating a deep understanding of the importance of forgiveness in the spiritual journey. This choice not only restored his friends before God, but also contributed to Job's complete restoration. Forgiveness, as Job teaches us, is not just a benefit to those who receive it. It also frees those who grant it. By forgiving, Job left behind the weight of bitterness and hurt, making room for God to operate fully in his life. This is a practical example of how forgiveness is an essential part of healing, both emotional and spiritual. In our own lives, we often encounter situations in which those we love fail us. These disappointments can create emotional barriers that hinder our spiritual growth. However, Job's example reminds us that forgiveness is not about justifying other people's actions, but about freeing our hearts to experience God's peace. Furthermore, the story of Job also emphasizes the value of presence in times of pain. Although his friends fell short in their words, simply being with Job at the beginning of his suffering was a meaningful gesture. It reminds us that we often don't need to have all the right answers or words to support someone. Being present, with an open heart, can be enough. Another important aspect of human relationships in Job's narrative is reconciliation. The act of interceding for his friends created a bridge of reconnection. It teaches us that even when we are hurt, it is possible to rebuild relationships based on grace and love. This message is especially relevant in a world where relationships are often discarded in the face of conflict. Job's forgiveness and intercession also point to something greater: reconciliation with God. Just as Job prayed for his friends, Christ intercedes for us before the Father, even when we are imperfect. This connection between human and divine forgiveness shows us that when we forgive, we reflect God's heart and live in alignment with His will. The story of Job reminds us that no one is without fault, but we can all be instruments of healing and reconciliation. Job chose to be a channel of blessing to his friends, despite his failures. This choice not only restored his relationships, but also strengthened his own faith. May we learn from Job the importance of forgiving, interceding, and valuing human relationships, even in difficult times. For in the end, it is through these connections that we experience God's grace in a tangible way and come even closer to His presence. Job's story is more than a narrative about suffering and overcoming. It offers us practical lessons that we can use in our routine. Even if we are not facing a series of calamities like him, the principles that emerge from his journey are timeless and applicable in any situation of challenge or uncertainty. First lesson: find purpose amid trials. How many times do we face difficulties and ask ourselves, why is this happening to me? Job also had this doubt. He lost his stability, his health, and even the support of his friends. However, instead of giving up, he sought purpose in the midst of the pain. This teaches us that even in the most difficult situations, we can look for something greater. For example, when facing a loss, we might ask, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this experience? In practice, this means reflecting on the lessons hidden in each challenge. If you are facing financial difficulties, this may be a time to learn how to better manage your resources. If you are experiencing family conflicts, perhaps this is the opportunity to strengthen bonds with patience and forgiveness. Just as Job discovered that his trials had a deeper meaning, we too can find purpose in adversity. Second lesson: maintain your integrity, even in the face of pressure. Another hallmark of Job's story is his unshakable integrity. He was wrongly accused, lost everything he had, but refused to abandon his principles. These days, we are constantly pressured to compromise our values. This can happen at work, in relationships, or even in everyday decisions. Learning from Job means staying true to what we believe, even when it seems difficult. For example, in a work environment where ethics are overlooked, maintaining your honesty can be a reflection of the integrity that Job demonstrated. This fidelity to values not only strengthens our character, but also connects us more deeply to our faith. Third lesson: cultivate patience. Job's patience is proverbial. Even when all seemed lost, he waited. He didn't know when or if his situation would change, but he maintained an attitude of perseverance. This kind of patience is crucial in our daily lives, especially in a world that values speed and immediate results. If you're waiting for an answer, whether in your health, career, or dream, Job reminds us that patience is a powerful virtue. This does not mean passively accepting difficulties, but trusting that God's timing is perfect. In practice, cultivating patience can involve prayer, meditation, and strengthening trust in God. Lesson 4. Lean on God, not circumstances. Job lost everything he owned, but he did not lose his faith. He knew that his relationship with God was more important than the circumstances around him. This lesson is especially relevant today when so many people place their security in material possessions or social recognition. Job teaches us to place our trust in something that cannot be shaken: God's faithfulness. In practice, this means redirecting our priorities. Instead of constantly seeking external validation, we can take time to strengthen our relationship with God. This may include reading scripture, times of prayer, or simply giving thanks for blessings, even in the little things. Fifth lesson: express your doubts and emotions to God. An often overlooked aspect of Job's story is how he expressed his doubts and emotions. Job was not afraid to question, lament, and even vent his pain before God. This shows us that God does not demand emotional perfection. He wants an authentic relationship where we can be honest about our feelings. In our lives, this can be translated into a habit of honest prayer. If something bothers you or seems unfair, take it to God. He is always willing to listen, and, as he did with Job, he can give us a new perspective, even if we don't have all the answers. Sixth lesson: practice forgiveness and reconciliation. After his suffering, Job had the chance to forgive his friends who criticized him. This act of forgiveness was essential to his own restoration. Just like Job, we are called to forgive, even when we have been wronged. This frees us from the weight of hurt and allows us to experience the peace of God. In practice, this means cultivating a heart willing to reconcile. If there is someone you need to forgive, consider how this can bring liberation to both parties. Forgiveness is not just for those who receive it, but also for those who give it. Seventh lesson: trust that there is a greater purpose. Job teaches us to trust that there is something greater beyond what we can see. He didn't know why he was suffering, but he chose to believe that God had a plan. In our lives, this may mean accepting that we may not always understand the reasons behind events, but we can trust God's purpose. This trust helps us maintain hope, even in difficult times. In practice, this can be strengthened through inspiring readings, moments of gratitude, and the support of a faith community. Job's lessons are not just theoretical, they are deeply practical. He teaches us that we can face any challenge when we lean on God, cultivate patience, and live with integrity. Whatever difficulty you face today, remember, there is wisdom in your story, and just like Job, you can find strength, purpose, and redemption. Job's story is often remembered for its extreme suffering, but there is something even more powerful in its telling: the way he found hope in the midst of pain. Job not only survived his trials, but also found an emotional and spiritual renewal that completely transformed him. From the beginning, Job was subjected to a level of pain that few could endure. He lost his possessions, his family, and his health in a short period. The intensity of his suffering was so great that he cursed the day he was born, wishing he had never come into the world. These moments of lament reveal the depth of his anguish, but also something essential. Job never stopped looking for answers. Even in his despair, he kept turning to God. This constant search is one of the most inspiring marks of his journey. Job did not deny his pain, nor did he repress it. On the contrary, he expressed it honestly and vulnerably. He screamed, questioned, and lamented, but remained in dialogue with God. This aspect of her story teaches us that hope is not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to continue looking for light, even in the darkest moments. Job asked difficult questions that resonate to this day. Why do the righteous suffer? Where is the justice in a world full of pain? He found no immediate answers, but his insistence on seeking understanding paved the way for a transformative encounter with God. This interaction didn't provide all the explanations Job wanted, but it did offer something even more valuable: a new perspective. God responded to Job, by highlighting the vastness of his creation and the depth of his wisdom. He did not explain the reasons for Job's suffering, but he reminded him that there is a greater purpose beyond what we can see. This moment brought Job deep emotional relief because he realized that he didn't need to understand everything to trust God. This realization is a milestone in Job's journey of hope, understanding that we can find peace even without all the answers. The strength of hope in suffering. Job's hope did not arise from a quick solution to his problems. It was born of his faith in a God he knew was greater than his circumstances. This teaches us something fundamental. True hope does not depend on immediate changes, but on an unshakable trust in the character of God. In our daily lives, it is common to face situations that seem unbearable. Losing a job, dealing with the death of a loved one, or facing health problems can leave us feeling helpless. The story of Job reminds us that even when all seems lost, we can find strength in God. Just like Job, we can use these moments to seek a greater purpose and connect more deeply with the Creator. The emotional impact of the encounter with God. When God spoke to Job, something changed within him. He went from a state of despair to a position of reverence and humility. Job realized that although he could not control or understand everything, he could trust the God who sustains the universe. This realization brought an emotional relief that no logical explanation could offer. On our journey, we often seek immediate answers to alleviate our pain. However, Job shows us that true emotional relief comes from an experience of faith and trust. When we recognize that God is in control, even in the most difficult situations, we find a peace that goes beyond human logic. The role of community in emotional renewal. Another significant aspect of Job's journey is the role of human relationships in his recovery. Although his friends initially failed to comfort him, Job's final act of intercession for them was a crucial step in his own emotional healing. By forgiving them and praying for them, Job freed himself from the weight of hurt and made room for the restoration of his soul. This part of Job's story teaches us that reconnecting with others is essential to finding emotional relief. Seeking support, offering forgiveness, and rebuilding relationships are practical ways to ease emotional burdens and strengthen our spiritual journey. Hope for the future. In the end, Job's story is a message of hope. He was restored, but his greatest victory was not material, it was spiritual and emotional. He emerged from his trials with a deeper understanding of God and a renewal of his faith. Job shows us that even when we face the worst, there is a future full of possibilities. Her story is a reminder that God can transform our pain into something meaningful. Applying the lesson to our lives. To find hope and emotional relief like Job, we can start by acknowledging our emotions and turning them over to God. This means praying honestly, seeking comfort in Scripture, and trusting that even without immediate answers, God is working for us. Additionally, we can strengthen our hope by surrounding ourselves with supportive people and seeking ways to help others, as Job did by interceding for his friends. Job's journey to hope teaches us that pain is not the end of our story. With God, there is always renewal, restoration, and a greater purpose waiting for us. Even in the most difficult times, we can trust that God is by our side, guiding us toward a future full of peace and meaning. We are coming to the end of this journey through the story of Job, but its lesson lives on. Job's life was not just a sequence of losses and pain. It was a demonstration of unwavering faith, emotional courage, and trust in something greater than himself. It's impossible to listen to your story without reflecting. What does it mean to me today? Job invites us to look at adversity from a different perspective. He didn't deny his pain, but he also didn't let it define who he was. Even when his questions went unanswered, he chose to trust. This choice did not exempt him from difficulties, but it led him to a profound transformation. The Job who emerges from suffering is not the same man who entered it. He left renewed, with an expanded understanding of God and life. Now think about your own journey. Perhaps you are facing challenges that seem insurmountable. It could be a recent loss, a complicated financial situation, or even doubts about the future. The story of Job reminds us that suffering is not the final chapter of our lives. It is often the ground where new strength and new hopes are born. Job taught us that we don't need to have all the answers to trust God. His final words echo with humility and reverence. "I knew you only by hearing you speak, but now my eyes see you." This is the central point of his story. It's not just about surviving suffering, but about experiencing a deeper connection with God in the process. This is a powerful lesson for all of us. In a world where we constantly seek control and understanding, Job reminds us that not everything is in our hands. There are things that are beyond our logic, but never beyond the love and sovereignty of God. Furthermore, Job teaches us the importance of not facing our battles alone. He found strength in seeking answers from God, and even when his friends failed, he forgave them and interceded on their behalf. This shows us that, even in times of pain, we can be an instrument of healing in the lives of others. Forgiveness, as Job exemplifies, is a key to emotional and spiritual freedom. Another fundamental point is that Job's restoration was not just material. God not only doubled his possessions, but also gave him a new life. He had the chance to start over, build new relationships, and live with a broader vision. It reminds us that true restoration starts from the inside out. It is a renewal of purpose, faith, and spirit. Now, imagine applying these lessons to your everyday life. What would it be like to live with more patience, knowing that not everything needs to be resolved immediately? What would it be like to trust that, even in the most chaotic situations, God is working on something bigger? The story of Job does not promise us that our lives will be free from pain, but it assures us that, with God, there is always hope, even in the desert. Job's journey challenges us to embrace uncertainty with confidence, to trust that God not only sees our struggles, but also walks with us through them. And when everything seems lost, remember that the Creator of the universe still has a plan for our lives, a plan that is not limited by what we see, but rooted in His eternal love. May the story of Job be a constant reminder that the storms of life can be turned into opportunities for growth. Just like Job, we can emerge from our desert stronger, more connected with God, and more prepared to face whatever comes. Job's story is an invitation to live with purpose, trust with courage, and believe that the last word is never suffering, but redemption. When you finish this reflection, take this truth with you. You are not alone. Job found God in the midst of his pain, and you can find Him too. No matter how difficult your journey, Job's story shows us that God's light always shines, even in the darkest moments. So the next time you face a challenge, remember Job. Remember your patience, your faith, and your ability to forgive. But most of all, remember your trust in a God who has never abandoned you. Because like Job, you too can find strength, purpose, and a new life, even in adversity. We have reached the end of this video, and I hope it has brought you inspiration and new perspectives. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This helps us to continue bringing content that uplifts and transforms. And if you want to go even deeper, don't leave without checking out the next video that is already waiting for you here. Click and continue this journey of learning and reflection. May Job's journey inspire yours today and always.